He had no arms, no legs, and a dream that most people quietly told him was impossible. To find someone who would love him, not as a symbol, not as an inspiration, but as a man. Nick Vujicic had spoken to millions. He had moved entire stadiums to tears. He had convinced countless strangers that their lives had value and purpose. But alone, in the quiet, he struggled to believe the same thing about himself. Then Kanae Miyahara walked into his world, and everything he thought he knew about what he deserved changed completely. Nick Vujicic entered this world in 1982 in Melbourne, Australia, with a condition so rare it didn't even have a widely recognized name at the time: tetraamelia syndrome. He was born without arms, without legs, with nothing but a small partial foot, what he would later affectionately call his little chicken drumstick, and an almost incomprehensible will to live fully. His early years were not easy. He struggled with depression and deep loneliness as a child. He questioned his own worth in ways that most of us will never fully understand. There were moments, he has said publicly, where he didn't want to go on, where the weight of feeling different, of feeling unseen, became almost too heavy to carry. But somewhere in the darkness, something shifted. Nick found faith. He found purpose, and eventually he found his voice. By his 20s, he had become one of the most recognized motivational speakers on the planet. His organization, Life Without Limbs, brought him to dozens of countries. He spoke to millions of people in schools, stadiums, churches, and prisons. And he had a gift for cracking people open in the best possible way. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave them feeling like they had remembered something important about themselves. But behind the applause and the standing ovations, Nick carried a private ache. He wanted what most people want: a partner, a family, someone who would come home to him at the end of the day and choose him again and again, not out of admiration, not out of inspiration, but out of love. Plain, ordinary, extraordinary love. The problem was, he didn't believe that was possible. He openly wondered whether any woman could truly see him as a romantic partner. Not a cause, not an inspiration, but a man worthy of being loved. Kanae Miyahara grew up with a story of her own. Born to a Japanese father and a Colombian mother, she was raised with a strong sense of family, faith, and warmth. She carried a kind of quiet grace about her, the sort of person who made everyone around her feel at ease without even trying. She was by any measure someone with options. She was beautiful, kind, deeply grounded in her values, and had a future that could have gone in any direction she chose. What defined Kanae wasn't the life she could have had. It was the clarity she had about what actually mattered to her. She wasn't looking for status or surface. She wasn't impressed by the things that tend to impress people at first glance. Kanae was looking for something real, a connection that lived deeper than appearances, deeper than convenience, deeper than anything the world might call practical. She wanted a love built on character, on kindness, on something that would still be standing long after everything superficial had fallen away. She just hadn't found it yet, and she had no idea that finding it would surprise the entire world. In 2008, Kanae attended one of Nick's speaking events in the United States. She was in the audience like everyone else, and like everyone else, she was moved by what she heard. But something about that encounter didn't end when the event did. They were introduced, they talked, and for Nick, something quietly extraordinary happened in that conversation. Here was a woman who looked at him without pity and without performance. She was warm, she was genuine, and she was completely at ease in his presence. Not because she was trying to be, but because that was simply who she was. For a man who had spent years quietly fearing that love wasn't available to him, that ease meant everything. They stayed in contact after that day. Nick had learned over the years how to be honest about his interior life. It was part of what made him such a powerful speaker. And so, even in these early stages, there was a realness between them that doesn't usually show up so quickly. They talked, they laughed, they began, slowly and without fanfare, to matter to each other. The romantic tension in their early connection wasn't dramatic or cinematic in the Hollywood sense. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of tension that comes from recognizing something in another person and being almost afraid to believe it. The kind where you catch yourself thinking about someone at random moments in the day, and then wondering if you're reading too much into it. Nick wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew something was. Nick had fears he didn't try to hide. He worried about the practicalities of partnership, about what it would mean for a woman to share her life with someone who needed a different kind of care. He worried that his vulnerabilities would eventually become too much, that Kanae would one day see the full picture and reconsider. But Kanae wasn't reconsidering. She was paying attention, and what she saw wasn't a list of limitations. She saw a man of extraordinary character, someone with humor and tenderness and an unshakable sense of purpose. She saw someone who had faced more adversity than most people ever would and had responded to it with love instead of bitterness. That kind of person is rare. Kanae knew it. Their relationship deepened over time, growing through long conversations, shared values, and a mutual faith that anchored them both. Nick has spoken publicly about how Kanae made him feel. Not like someone to be accommodated, but like someone genuinely wanted. That feeling, for a man who had quietly doubted it was possible, was transformative. When the time came, Nick proposed with everything he had. He got down, in the way that only Nick could, and he asked her to marry him. It was sincere, it was real, and it was completely him. Kanae said yes, not out of sympathy, not out of pity, not because she felt sorry for him or wanted to prove something to the world. She said yes because she had made a clear-eyed, wholehearted, fully informed decision that this was the man she wanted to spend her life with. Nick and Kanae were married in February 2012 in a ceremony in California. By all accounts, it was exactly what it should have been. Joyful, emotional, and completely them. Photos from that day captured something rare. Two people who looked genuinely, unmistakably happy. Not performed happiness, the real kind. What came next was even more meaningful. Together they built a family. Nick and Kanae now have 4 children, and Nick has spoken about fatherhood with a kind of wonder that suggests it still surprises him even now. He has talked openly about holding his children, about the love he has for them, and about how becoming a father reshaped the way he understood his own life and his own story. Nick has said publicly that Kanae gave him something he wasn't sure he would ever have. A sense of completeness. Not because he was incomplete without her, but because a love this real, this chosen, this free of pretense filled a space he had quietly been protecting for years. They travel together, they speak together, they raise their children together. Nick has even spoken alongside Kanae at events, the two of them sharing their story with audiences around the world. And in doing all of this, they continue, without even trying, to be a living answer to everyone who ever thought a love like theirs was impossible. Every year they spend together quietly dismantles every assumption the world ever made about what Nick's life was supposed to look like. Here is what Nick and Kanae's story actually says. Underneath all the warmth and the wedding photos and the life they've built together, it says that the story you've been telling yourself about your own worth is not necessarily the true story. It says that the love you think you don't deserve has a way of appearing anyway, and if you stay open, if you stay honest, if you refuse to let fear be the loudest voice in the room. Kanae didn't choose Nick in spite of who he was. She chose him as who he was, fully, without reservation, without conditions buried in the fine print. That distinction matters more than it might seem at first, because most of us spend our lives waiting to be chosen exactly that way, and quietly convincing ourselves it won't happen. What Nick and Kanae prove is that being truly seen by another person is not a miracle reserved for the conventionally lucky. It is what becomes possible when two people are brave enough to drop the performance, show up as themselves, and trust that it's enough. The world looked at Nick Vujicic and made assumptions. Kanae looked at Nick Vujicic and made a decision. And sometimes, the most unexpected love turns out to be the most inevitable one of all.